My husband Thomas kept a brown leather notebook in his desk drawer for 11 years. He filled it with dates, names, places, the kind of things a history teacher writes down because he believes someone should. He died before anyone read it. I read it on a Tuesday night in October, sitting on my porch in Savannah, with mint juleps still drying in my hair and my son's silence ringing in my ears. That notebook is the reason a man who owns half the riverfront cannot get a phone call returned. But I am getting ahead of myself. I do that. I start at the end and work backward, like a woman untangling Christmas lights in July, which I have also done, and which tells you approximately everything you need to know about how my brain operates. There is a silk handkerchief in the top drawer of my dresser, next to sock rolls that have not matched since 2019, and a single pearl earring whose partner vanished during a Thanksgiving I would rather not discuss. The handkerchief belonged to Thomas. Pale blue, thin white border. He carried it in his jacket pocket on our 6th anniversary because he read somewhere that a man should always carry a handkerchief. And Thomas was the kind of man who believed everything he read and then acted on it immediately. That is how we ended up with a rain barrel, a sourdough starter, and a pocket square I have kept for 10 years. It smells faintly like mint and grapefruit now. It did not always smell like that. It smells like that because of what happened on a Saturday night in October of last year when my son's fiancée threw a mint julep in my face in a restaurant on River Street in Savannah, Georgia. I have not washed it. I keep things. That is going to come up again. The drawer also has a birthday card from my son Ethan. It says, "To the world's second best mom. The first one owes me $20. He gave me that when he was 14. I have kept it for 12 years because I am the kind of woman who keeps birthday cards, parking receipts, and the memory of every time someone said my name in a room where nobody else was going to. Sunday mornings I am up at 5:30, whether I intend to be or not. My body made that decision 9 years ago and has refused to revisit it. I make coffee in a pot older than most of my friendships. I water the rosemary on my front porch even though the rosemary has gone leggy again for the 3rd September running, because Savannah heat and rosemary have a relationship I would describe as mutually hostile. And I sit on my porch in Ardsley Park, which is a neighborhood that people with more money than me call charming and people with less money than me call fine. The live oaks have Spanish moss hanging off them like old lace curtains nobody got around to taking down. In the mornings, before the humidity turns the air into soup, it is the most beautiful street in the world. I am biased. I do not care. My best friend Delphine texts me at 5:47 every Sunday. 3 words. You up, Helen? If I do not respond by 5:48, she assumes I have either died or been kidnapped by my cat, and she begins calling. Delphine owns a bookstore on Bull Street called Robichaud Books and Maps. She is 65, a retired history professor from Savannah State, and she knows more secrets about this city than the Spanish moss does. I trust Delphine with my life, which is a thing I will demonstrate later in a way I did not plan. My cat is named Captain. He is a tabby, 9 years old, 14 pounds. The veterinarian calls this concerning Captain through his behavior, calls it none of your business. He does not like most people. He likes me. He tolerates Delphine. He has strong opinions about men who wear cologne, which I discovered the one time I brought a date home in 2021. The date did not last. Captain did. My name is Helen Marsh. I am 48 years old. I was widowed at 37, which is young enough that people still tell you that you have plenty of time, and old enough that you stopped believing them about 6 years ago. Thomas was a history teacher at Savannah Arts Academy. He died in August of 2014 of amyotrophic lateral sclerosis, a disease that takes your handwriting before it takes your voice, and takes your voice before it takes everything else. He was 39. I have one son, Ethan, 26. I have a paid-off 3-bedroom Victorian in Ardsley Park with a porch that needs repainting. I have a 2018 Subaru Outback with 91,000 miles and a coffee stain on the passenger seat that has been there since the first Obama administration. And for 22 years, I have been a loan officer at Coastal Heritage Community Bank. We are federally insured. I have underwritten roughly 950 loans. That last part matters for reasons we will get to. What I want to tell you, what I have been trying to figure out how to say for 14 months, is about the night my son's fiancée threw a mint julep at my face across a private dining room on River Street. I want to tell you about the words she used while it was still dripping off my chin. I want to tell you about my son 4 seats away and what he said. I want to tell you about her father who was cutting into his shrimp and grits and who did not look up. Not when the drink hit. Not when she spoke. Not when I stood up and walked out. And I want to tell you what happened the next morning at 6:42 when a woman named Maggie Chen picked up her phone in a plaid bathrobe and made a call that changed the shape of everything. But mostly I want to tell you this. I had trusted my son for 26 years. I helped him with multiplication tables on a Friday night in 2004 because I could not bear watching him feel stupid about anything. I drove him to camp in Effingham County every June. I sat in the second row at his graduation in a clearance dress from Belk and cried when they called his name because his father was not there to hear it. And by the time I understood what my son had become, what I had raised and what someone else had sanded down and what had replaced the boy I knew, it was too late. Months too late. Maybe years. I have stopped trying to figure out which. I am going to take the handkerchief out of the drawer now. I always do when I tell this part. I am going to hold it for 30 seconds. Then I am going to tell you about an engagement brunch in Isle of Hope and a woman named Eleanor, and the exact moment I understood that my son was marrying into a family that was going to try to make me disappear one magnolia petal at a time. They got very close, but the notebook is not where this started. The beginning is a brunch in March and a house where nobody cooks. Isle of Hope is a neighborhood in eastern Savannah where the houses sit behind live oaks so wide you could park a sedan behind the trunk and nobody would find it for a week. The driveways are long. The lawns are trimmed by men who arrive at 6 in the morning in trucks that say things like Coastal Green Solutions, which is a very polite way of saying someone else cuts the grass. You drive up past a dock with 2 boats and 2 Mercedes that were washed that morning, and you try not to think about the fact that your Subaru is making a ticking sound from somewhere near the left rear wheel. That is probably fine. It was the last Sunday in March of 2024. My son had been engaged for 2 weeks. He had told me over FaceTime, which I want to say more about but will not because I think he did it that way because he was a little bit afraid of my face. That is a thing I am still working on forgiving him for. He was 26. Brooke was 25. They had been together 14 months. I had met Brooke exactly twice. Both times for coffee, both times for under an hour, both times in places where she checked her phone more than she checked on the conversation. The engagement brunch at her parents' house was going to be the 3rd time I had seen her, and the first time I would see the house she grew up in. I wore a sage linen blouse I bought at Target on clearance. I want to note this because it becomes relevant later. I liked the blouse. I still like it. I am wearing it right now, as a matter of fact. Brooke's mother, Eleanor, opened the front door. She was 57 years old, and her face did not move. I mention this not as cruelty, but as observation. Eleanor Devereaux was the kind of woman who had decided somewhere in her 50s to hand a dermatologist her entire personality in exchange for looking 43. She hugged me the way you hug a coworker at a retirement party for someone you never liked. She said, "Bless your heart, you found us." She said it the way a woman in Savannah says, "Bless your heart," when she means something else entirely. Then she said, "Welcome to our home," and the words "our home" came out like a charitable donation she was making, and I was the charity. The house was enormous. I am going to stop describing it because everything I say will sound like I am being petty, and I do not want to be petty. I will say this. The kitchen had 2 ovens. Neither oven had ever baked anything. I know this because during the tour, Eleanor said with a little laugh that was meant to sound self-deprecating, "Oh, I do not really cook. We have Lucinda on Wednesdays." I nodded like a person who understood. I did not understand. I still do not. Who is Lucinda? What does Lucinda do on Wednesdays? If you know Lucinda, tell her I said hello. Brooke's father, Garrett, came down the staircase exactly 9 minutes after I arrived. He was wearing tennis whites. He had not played tennis. I know this because the court was visible from the living room window and nobody had been on it. He shook my hand with the confidence of a man who had already decided my handshake was going to disappoint him and then confirmed it. He said, "So, you're the mom." He did not say my name. He was not going to say my name for the entire brunch. I did not register this at the time, but I noticed it around the 3rd course, and I would think about it later at 2 in the morning in a way that made my jaw tight. He introduced me to Eleanor's sister as Ethan's mother. He introduced me to a neighbor who stopped by as our Ethan's mom. At one point, he gestured at me toward the caterer and said, "She'll have the shrimp." The caterer looked at me. The caterer said, "And your name for the place card, ma'am?" I said my name. The caterer wrote it down. I remember that caterer more warmly than I remember most of my own cousins. God bless working people. Garrett's mother, Rosamond, who everyone called Rosie, arrived late in a cardigan and a simple string of pearls. She was in her late 70s. She hugged me. She said, "You must be Helen." "I am so glad to meet you, dear," she said my name. I have thought about that moment more than I have thought about most moments in my adult life. An old woman in a cardigan said my name in a house where nobody else was going to say it for the next 3 hours. Brooke was at the table in a dress that cost more than my car insurance. She was beautiful. I will give her that, and I will only give her that. She corrected my pronunciation of bouillabaisse. I had pronounced it correctly. I let her correct me. I have thought about this many times, and I still do not know if letting her correct me was kindness or cowardice. Probably both. Most of my worst decisions are both. Midway through the main course, Brooke leaned toward Ethan loud enough for me to hear and said, "Honey, does your mother usually wear linen to places like this?" My son laughed. "I want to tell you," he laughed nervously, "I want to tell you it meant nothing. I am a banker. I do not get to lie about what numbers say, and I do not get to lie about what a laugh sounds like." He laughed like someone agreeing with a joke at my expense. Eleanor asked me what kind of car I drove. This is one of those questions that sounds like a question but is not. It is a price check. I told her a 2018 Subaru Outback. She made a small, interested sound. The sound of a woman who already knew the answer. She said, "Oh, those are very practical. Practical in Isle of Hope is the word they use for poor. I learned that at the brunch. I have been using it against myself ever since." On the drive home, Ethan took me because my car was at the mechanic. I sat in his passenger seat and said quietly, "Honey, I want to talk about Brooke." My son said without looking at me, "Mom, please not tonight." So we did not talk. We listened to a podcast about college football recruiting. He dropped me off. He hugged me in the driveway. He said he loved me. And I stood in my driveway for about 4 minutes after his taillights disappeared, holding my purse, not crying, not doing anything, just standing. Because I had not yet figured out that what I felt at that brunch was the first small crack in a thing I had not named yet. I went inside. I took off the sage blouse. I hung it up. Captain was sitting on the hallway table staring at me the way he does when I have been somewhere that left a smell on me he does not approve of. He sniffed my sleeve once, turned around, and walked away. That cat knew something before I did. Cats always do. The summer of 2024 arrived in Savannah the way it always does, like someone draped a hot, wet towel over the entire city and then forgot about it until October. The air is not air in July. It is a substance. You walk outside and you are immediately participating in something your lungs did not agree to. The rosemary on my porch gave up around the second week of June. I kept watering it. I am aware of the metaphor. I watered it anyway. This is the problem with telling a story about a summer. Nothing happens all at once. It happens in small things you teach yourself not to notice because noticing them would require you to admit something you are not ready to admit. Nathan stopped calling on Tuesdays. I am sorry, Ethan. My son's name is Ethan. I have been saying it correctly for 26 years. It is the kind of name that should not trip anyone up, and yet here I am, 14 months later, still catching my throat on it when the story gets close to the parts that hurt. Ethan stopped calling on Tuesdays. This is a thing mothers notice and pretend not to notice because pretending is the only dignity available. A missed Tuesday. A returned call on Thursday at 9:30 at night that lasted 6 minutes. A text message that said, "Crazy week, love you." I have a file folder in my head for sentences like, "Crazy week, love you." I have been building that folder since Ethan left for college. It is a large folder. It is filed next to another folder labeled, "Things my son used to tell me before he started editing," which is even larger. In July, there was a photograph. The Devereaux family took their annual trip to a house they own on Hilton Head Island. I want you to understand that when I say a house they own on Hilton Head, I do not mean a timeshare. I mean a house. Ethan was in the photograph posted on Brooke's Instagram account, which I check more often than I am proud of and less often than you probably think. He was wearing a linen shirt I had not bought him. He had a sunburn on his nose. Brooke was beside him with her hand on his arm. And behind them both, standing with one hand on Ethan's shoulder, was Garrett Devereaux. I want to talk about that hand for a moment. It was resting on my son's shoulder, the way a man puts his hand on something he has decided belongs to him. Not aggressive, not obvious, just there. The way you put your hand on the hood of a car you just bought. I have seen men do this in loan meetings for 22 years. I know what a claiming hand looks like. I was not on that trip. I had not been invited. I had not expected to be invited. The photograph still did something to me I would not have predicted. I scrolled past it. I went to bed. I got up the next morning and made coffee in my old pot, and I did not mention the photograph when Ethan called 4 days later. I have decided in retrospect that this was a mistake. I have a file folder for mistakes too. Captain, for his part, spent that summer mostly horizontal. Savannah Heat does things to a 14-pound cat that I would describe as philosophically transformative. He lay on the kitchen floor like a fur puddle and stared at the ceiling fan with the expression of a creature who had given up on the concept of ambition. One morning in late July, he brought me a lizard, dropped it on my pillow at 5:22 in the morning. It was alive. It ran across my face. I am told this is a gift in cat language. It did not feel like a gift. It felt like an ambush. But I will say this for Captain. He was the only male in my life that summer who was still bringing me anything at all. Delphine's arthritis got worse in the heat the way it always does. Her fingers swelled up like small angry sausages, her word, not mine, and she had trouble shelving the hardcovers on the top rows at the bookstore. I went over on Thursday evenings to help. We would sit in the back of Robichaux Books and Maps between the Maritime History section and the local interest shelf, and Delphine would drink chicory coffee, even though it was 92 degrees outside, because Delphine does not believe in seasonal beverages. She believes coffee is coffee and weather is weather, and the two have nothing to do with each other. One Thursday in August, she told me about her grandfather. She did this the way Delphine tells you about anything important, which is sideways and without warning. We were talking about the city council vote on the waterfront development plan, and she said, almost as an aside, "Granddaddy Louis, rest his soul, always said Savannah remembers everything except the things it should." I asked what she meant. She looked at me for a second the way she looks at students who have just asked the right question for the wrong reason and said, "Honey, this city has buried a lot more than pipes under that riverfront." Then she changed the subject to a first edition she had found at an estate sale, and I let her because Delphine changes subjects the way other people change lanes, quickly and without signaling. I did not think about what she said again until October. I wish I had. I wish I had asked her one more question that night in August. But I was thinking about Ethan and the photograph and the hand on his shoulder and the fact that my son had said crazy week love you 4 times in 6 weeks, and I had believed him every time because the alternative was something I could not look at directly, like the sun or my bank balance after property taxes. I should tell you something about my work because it becomes the center of everything that happened next. I am the senior loan officer at Coastal Heritage Community Bank. I have held that position for 8 years. Before that, I was a junior loan officer for 6 years. Before that, I was a credit analyst for 4 years, and before that, I was a teller who was too stubborn to stay behind the counter. In 22 years, I have underwritten 950 loans, give or take. I have never had a morning go wrong the way the one I am about to tell you about did. I am going to skip forward to Monday, September the 16th, which is the Monday that changed the shape of my kitchen table forever. The shape did not actually change. I am being dramatic. The table is the same table, but the woman sitting at it stopped being the same woman, and that is a kind of change that no one warns you about because it happens in your skeleton, not on your face. On Monday, September the 16th, I walked into Coastal Heritage Community Bank at 8:05 in the morning, carrying a coffee from the place on Drayton Street that puts too much foam on everything but whose cashier knows my name, which at that point in my life, I was treating as a meaningful relationship. I hung my bag on the hook behind my office door. I sat down at my desk, and there it was. A loan application packet with a pink tab sticking out of the top right corner. My underwriting assistant, a young woman named Keely, who organizes files the way some people organize religion, with absolute devotion and zero tolerance for deviation, had flagged it. A pink tab meant new file, initial read, needs senior review. I received 2 or 3 pink tabs a week. They were never interesting. They were always commercial credit packets with financials I could read in my sleep and collateral I could appraise by smell at this point in my career. I turned the folder around so I could see the cover sheet. The borrower, printed in 12-point calibri, was Devereaux Development LLC. The requested amount was $35 million. The guarantor on the personal side was Garrett J. Devereaux. I sat for a minute. I did not open the file. I just sat. Captain does this thing where he sees a bird through the window and he goes completely still, not because he is calm, but because his entire body is doing math. That is what I was doing at my desk. Banker math. The kind of math where the numbers are not the problem. The problem is who the numbers belong to. Then I got up, walked down the hall to Maggie Chen's office, and closed the door behind me. Maggie is 58 years old. She has been the chief credit officer at Coastal Heritage since 2018. She has a framed photograph of her grandchildren on her credenza that has not moved in 6 years. I know this because I once bumped it with my elbow during a meeting, and she repositioned it with the precision of a woman adjusting a museum exhibit. I trust Maggie. Maggie trusts me. That trust was about to become a load-bearing structure. I sat down. I said, Maggie, the Devereaux file that came in Friday. Garrett Devereaux is my son's future father-in-law. Maggie put her pen down. She looked at me for about 4 seconds. Maggie has a way of looking at you that makes you feel like a spreadsheet she is auditing in real time. Then she said, well, that is a hell of a way to start a Monday. We disclosed the conflict up the chain that week. Compliance reviewed the situation. The bank's position, which was documented in a signed memo I still have a copy of because I am the kind of woman who keeps copies, was the following. I had no financial interest in the outcome of the loan. The engagement was recent and no wedding had occurred. I had been the lead officer on 4 prior loans connected to Devereaux's commercial network over the previous 6 years. Files I had built from the ground up. Files I knew the collateral on the way you know the bones of your own house. Removing me would restart the clock on a 60-day underwriting window with a new officer who had none of that institutional memory. So I stayed on as lead underwriter with a compliance overlay. My work would be independently reviewed by our acting compliance head, Marcus Adeyemi, before the committee saw it. This is a normal way to handle this. I want you to understand that it is a normal way to handle this because it becomes important later. Now here is the part where you are thinking, Helen, why did you not recuse yourself? And I want to answer you honestly because I promised I would. I considered it. I considered it on Friday night when I got the heads up about the file. I considered it on Saturday morning over coffee. I considered it on Sunday night while Captain lay across my lap like a fur barricade and the ceiling fan wobbled overhead. But here is the reality of commercial lending at a community bank in a mid-sized city. I had no financial stake. The wedding had not happened. I had the institutional knowledge. Pulling me off meant starting from scratch during a deposit-tight quarter when we could not afford to lose 60 days on a file this size. And I will be honest with you because I said I would be. I was also a little bit curious. My son was about to marry this man's daughter. I was about to read his books. I wanted to know what kind of businessman I was going to be related to. I wanted to know who I would be sitting across from at Thanksgiving dinners for the next 30 years. That was a human thing to want to know. I did not stop being human because I put on a blazer and walked into an underwriting meeting. So I stayed on the file. I took the packet home that Monday night. I sat at my kitchen table, 8 chairs around it, one of me eating leftover red beans and rice out of a container I should have thrown away 2 days earlier, and I opened the folder. The application was clean on its face. The financial statements were sharp. The appraisal on the primary collateral, a riverfront parcel on the west side of the Savannah waterfront near the old cotton warehouses, came in at $22 million. The rent projections looked solid. Garrett was personally guaranteeing the note. On a first pass, this was a fine file, a good file even, the kind of file that moves through committee without anyone raising a hand. I read it a second time. This is a thing I do with every file over 10 million. Most officers read once. I read twice. Thomas used to say I read loan applications the way he read Civil War letters, looking for the sentence the writer did not mean to include. He was not wrong. On the second read, something shifted. Not the numbers. The numbers were the same. It was something behind the numbers. A feeling in the back of my head. The kind of feeling a banker learns over 22 years to trust. The kind that shows up in your ribs before it shows up on your legal pad. I could not have told you what it was. Not yet. I just knew it was there the way you know there is someone standing behind you in a dark room. I made a note in my notebook. 3 words. Check Atlanta lean. Then I closed the folder, poured the rest of my coffee down the sink, and went to bed. Captain was already on my pillow. He had no concerns about the Devereaux file. He had concerns about the moth on the ceiling. I envied his priorities. I wish I could tell you I saw what was coming. I did not. UCC searches are one of those things that civilians do not know exist, and that I am only bringing up because this one changed my life. When a bank takes collateral on a loan, a building, a parcel of land, a fleet of trucks, whatever it is, we file a public record of that claim. It is called a UCC-1 filing. Anybody can search them. They are the single most boring piece of paperwork in commercial banking. I have never met a person at a dinner party who wanted to hear about UCC filings. I have tried. They do not. But they are also, on occasion, the place where you find the thing that changes everything. And on Tuesday, October the 1st of 2024, I found the thing. I ran a UCC search on the Devereaux Riverfront parcel through the Chatham County Clerk's database. Standard due diligence. I do this on every collateral file over $5 million. I was expecting to find our soon-to-be-filed lien, and maybe a second position line of credit from a few years back. Routine. Boring. The kind of search that confirms what the file already told you and lets you move on with your Tuesday. What I found instead was this. Atlanta First National Bank had filed a UCC-1 on that same riverfront parcel 11 months earlier. First position, $18 million, the same piece of land. First position for $18 million to a completely different bank. Filed 7 months before Garrett Devereaux sat down in our conference room and submitted an application claiming that same land as primary collateral for a $35 million loan from us. I am going to do the math out loud because I sat at my desk doing it on a legal pad with a felt tip pen while my coffee went cold. The parcel is appraised at $22 million. If Atlanta First National has an $18 million lien on it in first position, that leaves $4 million in available collateral value. And that is only if you ignore standard loan-to-value ratios, which no bank in the country ignores. We were being asked to take that parcel as primary collateral for $35 million. The math is not close. The math is $31 million short. The math is so far from close that the math is living in a different area code and has changed its phone number. I called Atlanta First National. This is a normal thing to do. Interbank due diligence on a shared borrower. I called a counterpart I have known for 8 years named Dana Okafor. I asked about the collateral. She confirmed it. First position, $18 million, filed the previous November. She sent me the filing documents. They were real. They were not ambiguous. They were $18 million of real. Then I pulled Garrett's personal financial statement from the application packet. Page 4. There is a question on page 4 that is printed in bolded 12-point font. It asks whether the borrower or any entity controlled by the borrower has filed for bankruptcy protection in the last 15 years. Garrett had checked the box marked no. I ran a Pacer search on my laptop. Pacer is the federal court record system. It is free if you do not mind spending 11 cents per page, which I do mind, but which I expensed. Devereaux Coastal Holdings, an entity Garrett controlled as managing member, had filed Chapter 11 bankruptcy in 2010, discharged $11.2 million in debts 14 years ago. The question on the application asks about 15 years. The box should have been yes. It was no. I sat very still. Then I pulled the environmental report from the application packet. Section 9, Historical and Archaeological Survey. Every commercial development on land within the Savannah Historic District requires a Phase 1 environmental review, and within that review there is a subsection that asks whether the property is located on or adjacent to any known or suspected sites of historical or cultural significance. The report had been prepared by an environmental consulting firm I had not heard of. The subsection was marked no significant findings. But stapled behind the report, in the supplemental notes that most people do not read, because supplemental notes are where consultants put the things they are required to say, but hope nobody notices, was a single sentence. Prior municipal survey, 2009, noted possible historical site, further survey recommended. The further survey had never been conducted. Garrett had signed the acknowledgement page. He knew. Then there was the appraisal. The appraiser's name was Julian Arnault. I did not recognize the name from our approved vendor list. I ran a search. Julian Arnault was a member of the Oglethorpe Club. Garrett Devereaux was a member of the Oglethorpe Club. A quick search through the club's annual golf tournament records, which are publicly available because the Oglethorpe Club believes in publicizing its charity work, even when its charity work is mostly rich men playing golf with each other, showed that Julian Arnault and Garrett Devereaux had been paired together in the member guest tournament 3 years running. The appraiser who valued the property at $22 million was Garrett's golf partner. I am not a lawyer, but I have spent 22 years reading loan files, and I can tell you that when the appraiser and the borrower have matching golf tans, the appraisal is not independent. It is a conversation they had on the back nine. I sat at my desk, and I looked at 4 pieces of paper. The UCC filing from Atlanta First National. The bankruptcy checkbox that should have been yes. The environmental report with the buried sentence about a possible historical site, and an appraisal signed by a man who could not hit a 7-iron without the borrower standing next to him. Together, these 4 documents described either an enormous collection of administrative oversights or a pattern of deliberate misrepresentation on a federally insured loan application. Those are the only 2 options. A banker does not get to pick which one it is. A banker is trained to recognize that it is one of the 2, and then to decide what to do next. I made a note. I closed the folder. I did not sleep well that night. Captain slept on my chest like a heated brick of judgment, which helped with exactly nothing, but which I appreciated in the way you appreciate a friend who shows up and says absolutely the wrong thing, but at least shows up. On Friday, October the 4th, at 5 in the afternoon, I sat at my desk with the building mostly empty and the cleaning crew running a vacuum somewhere on the first floor, and I drafted a private letter to a man I was going to have to sit across from at a rehearsal dinner in 6 months. The letter said, more or less, and I am paraphrasing because the real one is in a file drawer at the bank and I am not going to read you an underwriting document at this hour. The letter said, Garrett, in the course of standard due diligence, I have identified 2 items in your application package that appear materially inconsistent with public records. I would like to discuss them with you privately before I submit my findings to committee. Please contact my office on Monday, October the 14th. That was it. I was giving him a chance. In commercial banking, you sometimes give a borrower a chance to correct a misstatement before you escalate. Sometimes it is an honest mistake. Sometimes they have an explanation. Sometimes they pull the application and walk away quietly, and everyone pretends it never happened. There are legitimate professional reasons a banker does this. I was doing it partly for those reasons. I was also doing it, and this is the part I want to tell you truthfully, because he was my son's future father-in-law. Because in 6 months, I was going to have to sit across from this man at a table with flowers on it and pretend to be happy, and I wanted to give him the courtesy of a private conversation before the machinery started moving. The letter sat in my bag. I was going to mail it on Monday the 14th. Before I mailed it, I was going to the engagement dinner on Saturday the 12th. That was the plan. You see the problem with the plan. I did not see the problem with the plan at the time. Meanwhile, and this is the other thing that was happening that week, that I need you to know about. On Thursday evening, I drove to Bull Street to see Delphine. Her arthritis had been flaring badly all week. Her hands were swollen enough that she could not grip the hardcovers to shelve them, and the stack behind the counter at Robichaux Books and Maps had gotten tall enough that it was beginning to look like a structural opinion. I brought her a container of she-crab soup from the place on Congress Street. We sat in the back of the shop between the maritime history section and the local interest shelf, which is where Delphine and I have had every important conversation of the last 9 years. Surrounded by books about tidal patterns and the history of cotton and a signed first edition of Midnight in the Garden of Good and Evil that Delphine keeps in a glass case and talks about the way some people talk about their children. She was telling me about her grandfather again. Not directly. Delphine never tells you anything directly. She was talking about the magnolia trees on Abercorn Street and how 3 of them were planted by church congregations in the 1950s. And then she said, almost like she was reminding herself, and not me, Granddaddy Lewis planted a magnolia at every church he preached at. 5 churches, 5 magnolias. 3 of them are still standing. The other 2 got paved over for a parking lot and a condo, which tells you everything about what this city values when nobody is looking. I did not tell Delphine about the loan file. I did not tell her about the letter in my bag. I did not tell her about the UCC or the checkbox or the math that was $31 million short, or the appraiser who could not tell the difference between an independent valuation and a golf outing. I sat with my friend in her bookstore while her hands hurt, and I told her about Captain and the moth on my ceiling, and I made her laugh one time about the rosemary dying on my porch. I went home. I still think about that Thursday night. Delphine would have listened. Delphine would have been exactly the right person to talk to. But Delphine's hands were swollen and her grandfather's magnolias were on her mind, and there was a line I could not make myself cross. I do not know if that was love or cowardice. I have stopped trying to figure out which. On Saturday morning the 5th, I had to buy a dress for the engagement dinner. The dinner was at a restaurant on River Street, which is the kind of place where the menu does not have prices on your copy, and where people who look like me are generally assumed to be someone's guest rather than someone's equal. I stood in a boutique on Broughton Street for an hour and 15 minutes. I am a 48-year-old woman with a graduate degree and a senior position at a federally insured bank, and I was trying to find a dress that said mother of the groom and not woman who keeps a Tupperware of leftover red beans in her desk drawer. Which I did. I still do. I had red beans in my desk drawer that exact week. A saleswoman named Wanda, God bless Wanda, watched me pick up and put down 11 dresses, and finally said, with the gentleness of a woman who has seen this particular crisis before, "Ma'am, you keep reaching for the dark colors. Let us try something that looks like you are going somewhere good." I bought a sage green dress. I paid $188 for it. It is hanging in my closet right now. I have not worn it since that night. I have considered setting it on fire. I probably will not. I keep things. Maggie mentioned something to me on Friday afternoon, the 11th, the day before the dinner. She said it casually, the way a woman mentions something she wants you to register without making it a conversation. She said the board succession discussion was getting real. She said it would probably be formalized in the first quarter. She said, "Helen, Senior Vice President of Credit. You ready for that?" I said, "Maggie, ask me Monday." We both laughed. I meant it as a joke. It was a joke. I had no idea what Monday was going to look like. I cannot look at my work calendar from that week without feeling sorry for the woman who wrote on it. She had a sage green dress in a garment bag. She had a letter in her purse that she was going to mail politely on Monday. She had a boss who was about to hand her the keys to the credit department, and a cat who loved her, and a friend who texted her every Sunday at 5:47. She did not know yet. She did not know any of it. The restaurant on River Street, whose name I will not say because I am not in the business of giving free advertising to a place that served me the worst evening of my life, is attached to a hotel I will also not name. The private dining room is at the back, behind a curtain made of heavy linen, in a color I can only describe as the kind of beige that costs a lot of money to look that boring. I arrived at 6:50. The reservation was for 7. I was the first one there. I am always the first one anywhere. Thomas used to say I showed up early to my own surprise parties. That was a joke he made more than once. I am allowed to remember it now without my chest doing that thing it used to do. The table was set for 8. The centerpiece was 3 squat candles, a small arrangement of magnolia leaves, and a bowl of something that might have been decorative oyster shells or might have been actual oyster shells repurposed as decoration. I never found out. Nobody ate any of it. Through the window I could see River Street below, cobblestone, tourists, a woman selling pralines from a folding table, and beyond that, the dark, flat back of the Savannah River with a cargo ship moving through it like a building that had decided to go somewhere. Ethan came in first, alone, at 6:58. He hugged me the way a man hugs someone when he is checking a box on a list he made in his head on the drive over. I noticed this. I filed it. I did not say anything because I had a plan for the evening. I was a person who had plans. I am telling you this because it is funny in retrospect. The way a headstone is funny if you squint. Brooke, Garrett, Eleanor, and Brooke's younger brother Colton came in together. Colton was 23 and was already asking the waiter about the bourbon list before his jacket was fully off his shoulders. Brooke's grandmother Rosie arrived 2 minutes later with Brooke's college friend Savannah, who was the maid of honor, and who I mention only because she existed and because she spent the entire dinner looking at her phone with the concentration of a woman defusing a bomb. Rosie was in her late 70s. She was wearing a cardigan and a single strand of pearls. She walked toward me with the kind of purpose that old women have when they have decided they are going to do something decent and they do not care who watches. She hugged me. She said, "You must be Helen." "I am so glad to finally meet you, dear." She said my name. An old woman in a cardigan said my name in a room where nobody else was going to say it for the next 2 hours. I have thought about Rosie many times since. I hope she is well. I hope her cardigan is warm. I hope someone in that family deserves her. The seating was already arranged. I was at the corner between Colton and the wall, which is where you put someone when you want them to be present but not central, like a fire extinguisher. Garrett was at the far end, with Eleanor on one side and Brooke on the other. Ethan was across from Brooke. Rosie was directly across from me. Thank God for Rosie. She was the only person at that table who looked at me like I was a human being with a first name and a reason for being alive. Garrett ordered wine for the table without asking anyone. A bottle of something French that cost more than my water bill. I had been planning to have one glass. I had a glass. It was very good wine. I want to be clear that this is not the drink that ended up on my face. Keep listening. The meal was an hour and 40 minutes of very small cuts. Eleanor asked Rosie across the full length of the table and loud enough for everyone to hear whether she had met Ethan's mother before. She had, twice. Eleanor knew this. The question was not for Rosie. The question was for my benefit, in the way that a woman in a dining room can fire a bullet that sounds like a question if she is practiced enough. Garrett at one point gestured toward the waiter and said, "She will have the crab cake," without looking at me. The waiter, a young man named Jerome, who I later learned was a law student at Savannah Law School and who was maybe 25 years old, looked at me. He said, "And your name for the order, ma'am?" I said my name. He wrote it down. I remember Jerome more clearly than I remember most people in this story. That young man had more presence at that table than anyone with a last name on the reservation. Eleanor at one point leaned toward her sister-in-law 2 seats down from me and said, "And I am telling you this the way I remember it, which may not be exactly right but is close, small-town widow energy." Honestly, I do not know what he sees in it. She was talking about Colton's ex-girlfriend, but she said it loud enough that she meant me to hear it about me, and I heard it. And I know I heard it because I looked across the table at Rosie, and Rosie's eyes closed for about 2 seconds and then opened again. Rosie knew too. Brooke leaned toward Ethan somewhere around the second course and said, "Is that linen? At a place like this?" Ethan did not say anything this time. He looked at his plate, which was worse than laughing, because at least a laugh is a response. Looking at your plate is a decision to let something happen to someone you are supposed to love. I want to stop here for a moment. Thank you for being here. Really, truly, thank you. I know this is a long one, and I know some of you have been with me through several of these stories now, and it means more than I know how to say without sounding like a greeting card. If you are still listening, please go ahead and subscribe if you have not already. And in the comments, tell me where you are watching from and what time it is where you are right now. I read every single comment, every one. You have no idea what it does for me on the days I need it. All right, back to the table. Brooke was drinking fast. Mint juleps with a sprig of something that might have been rosemary and might have been thyme. I am not an herb expert. I am a banker. Her third one arrived before the salad course cleared. By the time the entree came, she was on her fourth. I want to be fair to Brooke on one specific point. I do not think what happened next was entirely in her control. I think she was drunk. I said this once to Delphine 6 weeks after the fact on my porch, and Delphine said, "Helen, a drunk woman tells you what a sober woman thinks." I have not argued with Delphine about this because Delphine is usually right about things she says on porches. Here is what happened. Brooke was gesturing with her right hand while telling a story about a weekend in Charleston. Her sleeve was drifting toward her water glass. And I noticed, because I notice things, because my brain catalogs small dangers the way other people's brains catalog song lyrics, a palmetto bug on the leather strap of her handbag. It was about 3 inches from her wrist. She had not seen it. It was the size of a small car, because this is Savannah, and our insects have ambitions. I reached across the corner of the table. I did it the way a mother reaches, without thinking, the way you catch a glass before it falls off a counter, or grab a child's collar before they step off a curb. 2 fingers on the inside of her wrist. I touched her skin for maybe 2 seconds, and pointed at the palmetto bug sitting on the leather strap of her handbag like it owned property there, which, in Savannah, it arguably did. Brooke looked down at my hand on her wrist. Then she looked up at me. She looked at me the way you look at something on the bottom of your shoe. She picked up the mint julep she had been drinking, her fourth, the glass still half full, and she threw it. Not a splash, not a gesture, a throw. The glass stayed in her hand. The liquid left the glass, and it hit my face. All of it. My cheek, my left eyelid, my chin. The collar of the sage green dress I had paid $188 for on a Saturday morning on Broughton Street, while a woman named Wanda was being patient with me. The mint and the grapefruit and whatever herb that was went into my hair and down my neck and into the pearl earring Thomas gave me on our 3rd anniversary, the one whose partner has not been missing since Thanksgiving, but which I was wearing anyway because I am the kind of woman who wears one earring to a dinner she is already losing. Then Brooke said the sentence, and I can still hear her voice 14 months later, and I wish I could not. She said, "Keep your calloused hands to yourself. This is why some families stay on one side of the river." The room went quiet. Not movie quiet. Real quiet, which is worse than movie quiet because real quiet has texture. Real quiet is the sound of a fork being set down slowly on a bread plate somewhere to your left. Real quiet is the sound of a waiter freezing in a doorway holding a bread basket with both hands, like he is holding a baby he was not expecting. Real quiet is the sound of a 23-year-old boy named Colton exhaling next to you like he has just watched something he is going to have to describe to someone later, and he already knows he will not describe it. Well, I sat there, mint julep dripping off my chin, my left eye stinging from the grapefruit, my hair wet, the sage dress darkening across the collar in a way that was never going to come out and that I knew even in that moment was never going to come out because I have been doing my own laundry for 48 years and I know what a stain looks like when it has decided to stay. Ethan was across the table and 4 seats down. He looked at me. He looked at Brooke. He looked back at me. I watched my son's face do something I had never seen it do before. It made a calculation. I want you to understand that I saw it. I saw my 26-year-old son calculate. The way you watch someone do math on a whiteboard, except the math was, which of the 2 women at this table am I going to be a man for? And the whiteboard was his face, and the answer was visible before he opened his mouth. 3 seconds after the mint julep hit my face, my son said, in a voice that was just loud enough for the table to hear, "Mom, don't." Not, Brooke, what the hell? Not, "Are you okay, Mom?" Not any of the sentences a son is supposed to say when someone throws a drink at his mother's face in a restaurant. He said, "Mom, don't." As if I were the problem? As if my 2 fingers on his fiancée's wrist to point at a bug were the thing in that room that needed to be corrected. Garrett, at the head of the table, was cutting into his shrimp and grits. He had been cutting when the drink hit. He continued cutting. He sawed a small piece off. He speared it on his fork. He raised the fork halfway to his mouth. He lowered it. He sawed another piece. He did not look up, not at me, not at his daughter, not at my son, not at the mint julep dripping onto the tablecloth. The entire time, from the moment the drink hit my face until I stood up, Garrett Devereaux did not look up from his plate one single time. Except once. He looked up once, and it was not at any of us. He looked at Jerome, the waiter, who was still standing in the doorway with the bread basket, and he made a small gesture with 2 fingers. The kind of gesture a man makes when he wants his water glass refilled. Jerome did not refill the glass. Jerome was looking at me. I will remember Jerome's face for the rest of my life. He was 25 years old. He was horrified. That young man was more present at that table than my own son. Rosie, small and 70-something in her cardigan, reached across the table and put her hand on my wrist. She squeezed it once. She did not say anything. She squeezed and let go. In a room full of people who had decided I was not worth speaking to, an old woman in pearls held my wrist for 2 seconds, and that was enough to keep me from saying something I would have spent the rest of my life regretting. I opened my purse. Thomas's silk handkerchief was inside. I had brought it for luck, which I am embarrassed to admit, but which I am telling you because I am done being embarrassed about things I did before I knew what I was walking into. I took it out. I dabbed my face. I dabbed the collar of the sage dress. I folded it carefully. I put it back in my purse. The handkerchief smelled like mint and grapefruit now. It was going to smell like that for 14 months. It still does. I stood up. I looked at my son for about 1 second. I looked at Brooke. I said 1 sentence to the table, which I remember because it was the last polite thing I said to any of them. I said, "Congratulations to the bride." And I walked out through the linen curtain that cost a lot of money to look that boring, past Jerome, who stepped aside and whose eyes followed me to the door and into the hallway, and through the lobby, and out the front entrance onto River Street on a Saturday night in October. I did not have my car. It was at the mechanic. Long story, not relevant, involves an armadillo and a mailbox, and a Tuesday I would rather not relive. I was going to walk home. 11 blocks along River Street, and then up through the squares to Ardsley Park in a wet sage dress that smelled like a cocktail menu, while tourists ate pralines on a bench by the fountain, and couples walked past me toward their nightcaps. Nobody looked at me. This is a skill women my age have. It involves a certain angle of the chin and a specific arrangement of the face that says, "I am fine, do not ask. I am simply a woman walking home in a wet dress on a Saturday night, and this is a choice I have made. I do not know how I would teach it to you." It is not something you learn. It is something that happens to you enough times that your face learns it on its own. The cobblestones on River Street are uneven in a way that feels intentional, as if the city wants you to pay attention to where you are putting your feet. I paid attention. I paid attention to every single stone for 11 blocks because paying attention to the ground was the only thing keeping me from paying attention to the thing that had just happened to my face. A couple walked past me eating pralines from a wax paper bag. A man on a bench was playing guitar, badly, for tips. A bachelorette party stumbled out of a bar in matching pink sashes, and one of them said something to me that I think was meant to be friendly, but that I did not hear because my ears were still ringing with a sentence about the other side of the river. Savannah at night in October smells like the river and salt, and something sweet that might be the jasmine on someone's fence, or might be the praline shop that never closes. The Spanish moss looked silver under the streetlights. A cargo ship horn sounded somewhere downstream. I walked past all of it like a woman inside a painting she did not ask to be in. It took me 22 minutes to get home. I know this because I looked at my phone when I left the restaurant and I looked at it when I reached my porch. My brain does this. It catalogs time the way other people catalog music. At Thomas's funeral, I remember thinking the service started 6 minutes late. I have been like this my entire life. I have stopped fighting it. Captain was sitting on the front porch when I arrived. He was on the railing, which he is not supposed to be on because the railing is 40 years old, and I am not confident it could support a coffee mug, let alone 14 pounds of moral authority. He looked at me. He looked at my dress. He jumped down and rubbed against my legs and then followed me inside without making a sound. Captain is not a quiet cat. Captain has opinions about everything and shares them at volume. The fact that he was silent tells you something about how I must have looked walking through that door. I did not turn on the lights. I walked through the hallway into the kitchen. I sat down at my kitchen table, 8 chairs around it. Thomas's chair still at the head where it has been since August of 2014. Nobody has sat in that chair in 10 years. I dust it. I have considered moving it. I have not moved it. I keep things. The stove clock said 10:21 when I sat down. I sat in the dark for 43 minutes. I know this because I looked at the clock when I sat down and I looked at it when I got up, and I am the kind of woman who, even in a crisis, cannot stop herself from noting the passage of time. Captain jumped onto the table, which he is also not supposed to do, and sat directly in front of me like a small furry psychiatrist waiting for me to say something billable. I did not say anything. I sat in the dark at my kitchen table in a wet sage dress that smelled like a cocktail garnish, and I thought about the letter in my bag. The polite letter, the one I was going to mail on Monday, the one that gave Garrett Devereaux the professional courtesy of a private conversation before the machinery started moving. I thought about Garrett not looking up from his plate. I thought about the math that was $31 million short. I thought about a checkbox that should have been yes. I thought about a sentence somebody taught my son to say, and that my son had said to me while mint julep was still on my chin. And I understood, sitting in the dark in that kitchen, that the letter in my bag was never going to be mailed. The letter in my bag had become, in the 11 blocks I walked from River Street, something else entirely. The letter had been a courtesy. It was now a question I was no longer interested in asking. At 11:04, I started to cry. I want to get this out of the way quickly because I do not think it is the interesting part, and because I suspect some of you wanted me to cry harder and longer than I did, and I want to disappoint you gently. I cried for about 30 minutes. I cried with my forehead on the kitchen table. I cried in the stupid, unphotogenic way that real people cry The kind that involves your nose running onto your own arm and you being too exhausted to go get a tissue, so you use the sleeve of a $188 dress because at that point the dress has already had a worse night than you have. I was not crying about Brooke. I was not crying because I got wet. I was crying for my son. I was crying because I understood on River Street, somewhere around Block 7, that my son had made a choice and that the choice was not me. That he had looked at two women at a table and he had picked wrong, and I was going to have to spend the rest of my life getting used to being the second favorite mother at his future Thanksgivings. That is what I cried about. That is the only thing worth crying about when it comes to your children, not the insult, not the drink, the math. The math your child does when he calculates your value against someone else's and finds you wanting. At 11:37 I stopped. I got up, I went to the bathroom, my eye makeup was on my chin. I had mascara in my left ear. Do not ask me how. Mascara migrates to places the laws of physics cannot explain. I washed it off. I put on the ugliest thing I own, which is a Savannah College of Art and Design t-shirt I bought at a yard sale for $2 in 2020 and a pair of pajama pants with palm trees on them that I bought at Target in July of 2023, because they were $3.99 and my dignity was elsewhere that afternoon. I put my reading glasses on. I made tea. Chamomile from the tin Delphine gave me for Christmas. I did not drink the tea. I held it. Captain was on the kitchen table again, staring at me with the expression of a creature who has been waiting for me to stop leaking from my face so we could get to the part of the evening he considers relevant, which is whatever happens next. I set the tea down. I opened my laptop. I want you to picture this correctly because it matters to me that you see it. A 48-year-old woman. No makeup. Hair in a claw clip. Wearing a Savannah College of Art and Design t-shirt she bought at a yard sale for $2 in pajama pants with palm trees on them from Target for $3.99. Reading glasses on. Chamomile going cold on the counter. A cat on the kitchen table staring at her like a parole officer. Opening a laptop at 11:48 p.m. on a Saturday night to end a man's professional life. I did not look dangerous. A possum going through my trash would have looked at me through the window and said, "That lady is headed to bed. Hold that picture. The picture is part of the point." The memo was half drafted. I had started it Thursday. The Thursday version recommended conditional approval pending borrower clarification of items identified in sections 4 through 6. In banker language, that means we are giving you a chance to explain, and we will probably still give you the money if the answer is not catastrophic. I opened the draft. I read it. I put my hands on the keyboard. I deleted conditional. I deleted pending. I deleted the entire paragraph that gave Garrett Devereaux the courtesy of a phone call on a Monday afternoon, while I pretended that a man who watched his daughter throw a drink at my face while cutting his shrimp deserved the dignity of a power conversation. The new recommendation said, based on material misrepresentations identified in sections 4 through 6, I am recommending against approval. I am further recommending referral to our FDIC fraud investigations liaison for a determination on whether a suspicious activity report is warranted. I want to be clear, that is not spite. That is the regulation. When a bank officer identifies duplicate collateral pledged to two federally insured institutions, undisclosed bankruptcy, and a compromised appraisal from the borrower's golf partner, we are required by federal law to escalate, not suggested, required. I wrote what the document said. I attached the UCC filing from Atlanta First National, the Pacer records from 2010, and the Oglethorpe Club golf tournament pairings as exhibits. I did not use a single adverb. My memo would have been boring if it had not been a bomb. At 12:08, I hit send. Addressed to Maggie Chen, copied to Marcus Adiemi, compliance officer. At 12:22, I was rinsing the chamomile down the sink and felt something wrong. A banker's instinct in a claw clip. I went back to my laptop. Marcus Adiemi's out of office was on, paternity leave since September the 20th. The acting compliance head was Rafael Torres. I had sent a fraud referral memo to a man presumably changing a diaper in Pooler. I said one word into my kitchen. The word I never say. I said it once to the refrigerator. Captain looked at me with approval. Resent to Rafael Torres, added Maggie, corrected routing, 12:25, 3-sentence apology for the hour and the duplicate. Raphael, who sleeps 4 hours a night like he is training for something nobody has explained, replied at 12:28. Got it, Helen. Well done. Try to sleep. Rafael Torres, wherever you are, I owe you a lunch. That was the mistake. Small. Caught in 14 minutes. In a better story, it would have been dramatic. In a real story, mistakes look like a woman typing with shaking hands at midnight in a dark house. Then the other email. I sat in front of the blank compose window for 19 minutes. I got up, walked to the freezer, stood in the cold blue light in my palm tree pajamas like a very sad appliance commercial, and ate 2 spoonfuls of butter pecan ice cream from the container. I ate a third because 2 seemed like a statement and 3 seemed like a lifestyle. Then I went back to the laptop. Here was my problem. The memo was my job. A banker finds fraud indicators. A banker reports them. The email was different. Patricia Langford, chair of the Savannah Preservation Society, had called me in August. She said Garrett Devereaux was being considered for the hospital board. Any concerns? I had said I did not know him well enough to speak to his character. That was true in August. It was not true in October. The question at my kitchen table was whether writing Patricia was my professional obligation or me wearing my job like a disguise while settling a score. I sat with that. I want you to know I sat with it. I did not write the email in anger. The memo, yes. The memo I wrote in anger. But my anger and my regulatory obligation happened to point at the same sentence. The Patricia email required honesty about my motives. Here is where I landed. Patricia asked a direct question in August. I gave a generic answer because I had no specific information. Now I had specific information. Pretending I still had only my August answer was the actual lie. The lie was not writing the email. The lie was not writing the email. That is the sentence I am least embarrassed of in this entire story. 4 sentences. Professional. Sent at 1:15. Between the memo and the email, Captain jumped onto the keyboard and nearly transmitted a string of nonsense to the chair of the Savannah Preservation Society. I caught it. Captain showed no remorse. Captain has never shown remorse about anything. I closed the laptop, put my forehead on the table for a minute, not sleeping, just needing something solid against my skull. Then I dragged myself to bed in the pajamas and the claw clip and slept for 9 hours and 22 minutes. The longest I have slept since approximately the 2nd trimester of my pregnancy with Ethan. I woke at 10:30 Sunday morning. The sun was too bright and too cheerful and had no business being either of those things. Captain was on my chest. My phone had 37 notifications. I did not look at them. I lay in bed in my terrible pajamas and thought very clearly, somewhere in Isle of Hope, a man is pouring coffee. And he has no idea what a woman in palm tree pajamas just did to his entire year. I want to reconstruct a morning I was not present for because it is the morning you came here to hear about, and because I have pieced it together over 14 months from Maggie, from Patricia Langford, from a very gossipy woman at Atlanta First National whose name I will protect because she knows where all the filing cabinets are, and eventually from Ethan himself, who was in the kitchen for part of it. Every detail I'm about to give you was confirmed by at least one person who was there. I have fact-checked this against my own standards as a banker, which are annoyingly high. Maggie Chen reads email at 5:50 every morning of her life. Her husband has been trying to get her to stop for 18 years. He has failed. On Sunday, October the 13th at 5:50 a.m. Maggie was sitting in her kitchen in Middletown in a plaid bathrobe, drinking coffee, reading the memo I had sent at 12:08 and corrected at 12:25. By 5:55, she had read it twice. By 6:15, she had called Vivian Park, the bank's chief risk officer. By 6:38, Maggie and Vivian had agreed that the professionally responsible thing was to call Garrett before the committee met Monday. Not because he deserved the courtesy. He did not. But because Maggie Chen is the kind of woman who signals before she changes lanes even in an empty parking lot, that is the kind of banker Maggie is. At 6:42 a.m., Maggie called Garrett's cell phone. Garrett was already awake. He was in his kitchen in Isle of Hope, French press going, charcoal cashmere robe over pajamas. Eleanor was upstairs. Brooke was upstairs. The morning light was coming through the windows off the marsh, and the kitchen smelled like coffee and money, which in Isle of Hope are approximately the same fragrance. His phone vibrated on the marble counter. Maggie Chen, Coastal Heritage Community Bank, 6:42 a.m. on a Sunday. Garrett was not a stupid man. He knew that 6:42 on a Sunday from your banker is not a call about golf. He answered. He said, Maggie, it is Sunday. Maggie said, Garrett, I am going to need about 15 minutes of your time before Monday. What followed was 15 minutes of the driest, most neutrally professional language Maggie Chen could produce, and Maggie can produce a great deal of dry language. She told him the bank's initial review had identified collateral and disclosure concerns of a material nature. She told him the file would be handled consistent with regulatory obligations. She did not say fraud. She did not have to. Garrett heard the word fraud in the silence between every sentence Maggie did not say. That is how the word works in banking. It is loudest when nobody speaks it. 7:03. Garrett was off the call. He poured himself a second cup of coffee from the French press. This cup also went cold. He would not finish a hot cup of coffee until Thursday. I know this because Ethan told me much later that Brooke kept complaining that week about her father microwaving the same mug 3 times in a row. Small detail. I kept it. I keep things. 7:41. Garrett called his lawyer. His lawyer did not answer because his lawyer was on a golf course on Kiowa Island. Garrett left a voicemail. I do not know what the voicemail said. I imagine it was calm and measured because Garrett Devereaux is the kind of man who stays calm when the building is on fire and then bills someone for the smoke damage. By 9, he was on his second lawyer. By noon, he was on his third. One of them finally picked up. 9:04. Brooke came downstairs. She was hungover. She was in a robe. She asked her father for Advil. Her father, without looking up from his phone, said, Brooke, what happened last night at that dinner? Brooke said, Daddy, I do not know what you mean, Garrett said, with Ethan's mother. Brooke said, I do not want to talk about it, Garrett said, Brooke. And this is Ethan's account from the porch in December, Brooke said. She started it. Garrett looked up at his daughter for the first time that morning. He looked at her for about 4 seconds. He said, Get Ethan down here. He did not say anything else. He went back to his phone. I have thought about that moment often, not with sympathy, with recognition. I know what it looks like when a man realizes his daughter has handed someone a weapon and pointed it at the family business. That is not concern. That is inventory. Monday, October the 14th. The loan committee met at 2:30 in the afternoon. I was not in the room. I had been asked to recuse from the discussion for optics, which I happily did. They tabled the application pending independent review of the collateral and disclosures. The vote was unanimous. I learned this at 3:42 from Rafael Torres, who poked his head into my office, gave me a thumbs up, and disappeared before I could thank him. Rafael communicates primarily through hand gestures and one-line emails. I respect this enormously. That same week, Atlanta First National opened its own internal review of their $18 million facility with Garrett. Dana Okafor's interbank call had made its way up the chain. This was going to happen eventually. I just made it happen faster. The system was working. I had not broken the system. I had simply stopped standing between the system and the man it was designed to catch. That night, I went home and waited for the call from Ethan. It was coming. I was certain. I had made peace with what I was going to say. I had not figured out what I was going to do when he said whatever he was going to say back. The call did not come Monday. It did not come Tuesday. It did not come Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, Saturday, or Sunday. 7 days of silence from a son who used to call me every Tuesday. 7 days of looking at my phone on the kitchen table next to a plate of whatever I was eating alone that night and seeing nothing. Captain sat on the chair across from me every evening that week and watched me not get a phone call. He did not judge. That is not true. He judged constantly. But he stayed. The call did not come Monday. It did not come Tuesday. It did not come Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, Saturday, or Sunday. On Monday, October the 21st, at 9:07 in the evening, I was sitting on my couch watching an old episode of a British baking show I had seen 9 times, eating a bowl of cheese grits with butter the way women eat cheese grits when they have given up on the concept of dinner as a structured event. Captain was on the arm of the couch looking at the television with the expression of a creature who does not understand why humans watch other humans make cake, but who has decided to tolerate it. The doorbell rang. I checked the peephole. It was my son. I opened the door. I did not say hello. I said, "Honey, come in." He did not come in. He stood on the porch. His jacket was unbuttoned and wrinkled, in a way that told me he had been wearing it for longer than a jacket should be worn without being hung up. He had not shaved. He was holding his car keys in his fist, not in his hand, in his fist, the way a man holds keys when he is using them as a substitute for the thing he actually wants to do with his fingers. He said, "I got let go today." I said, "Honey, come inside. We will talk about it." He said, "I am not coming inside, Mom. I am standing on this porch because I do not think I can sit on your couch right now." And then my son said things to me on my front porch in Ardsley Park on a Monday night in October that I am going to partially repeat and partially not. Some of them I have not been able to say out loud since. Some of them are not mine to put in a story. They belong to him, and he is going to have to decide someday what to do with them. But I will give you the shape. He said I had ruined his career. He said I had ruined his engagement. He said Brooke was taking space, which is a phrase people use when they mean leaving, but do not want the word to sound like what it is. He said Garrett had let him go from the development firm. Not Devereaux Development itself, but the adjacent company Garrett had gotten him into, the one that was supposed to be his future, the one with the office and the title and the business cards that said his name, under a name that was not ours. He said he had packed his things into a cardboard box. He said the cardboard box part twice. I think the cardboard box was the detail that broke him, because a cardboard box is the kind of object that makes abstract failure into something you can hold and carry to your car. Then he told me something I had not known. He said Garrett had asked him to sign inspection documents on the riverfront project, sign-offs on soil surveys and structural assessments that Ethan had not read. Garrett told him it was a formality. He signed them. He signed them because his future father-in-law told him to, and because he was 26 and wanted to belong to something larger than a 3-bedroom house in Ardsley Park with a porch that needed repainting. Now, those signatures existed on documents connected to a project under federal review, and my son was afraid in a way I had never seen him afraid before. Not of me, of what was coming. Then he said the sentence, the one I have thought about every single day since. He said, "You never wanted me to have anything bigger than this porch." He said it with a small crack in his voice at the end. He meant it. He was 26 years old. He had not slept in a week, and he had learned that sentence from somebody else. I do not know if it was Brooke or Garrett or Eleanor or the air inside that house in Isle of Hope, but my son did not build that sentence by himself. Someone handed it to him. And he carried it to my porch and set it down between us like a cardboard box full of things he thought were mine to carry. I want to tell you I had a brilliant answer. I did not. I had the worst possible answer. I had the true one, which is a thing you learn as you get older is almost never the useful one. I said, "Ethan, I did not do this. I found it. There is a difference." He said, "Mom, spare me the banker words." He turned around. He walked down the porch steps. He got in his car. He drove off. I stood in the doorway holding the bowl of cheese grits, watching his taillights go down the street toward Bardstown Road, and I thought in the unhelpful cataloging way my brain insists on operating, I think that car needs new brake lights. I closed the door. I walked into the kitchen. I did not turn on the lights. I sat down on the floor. Not at the table, on the floor. The table was right there. The couch was 6 feet away. I sat on the floor in the dark with the bowl of cheese grits in my lap, and I ate them cold. Captain came and sat beside me. He put his head on my thigh. He did not make a sound. He was the only creature in that house who did not need me to explain what had just happened. He just sat with me on the floor while I ate cold grits in the dark and waited for something inside my chest to stop making the sound it was making. I do not have an explanation for the floor. I have thought about it. The couch was right there. The chair was right there. The floor made no sense. But grief does not use furniture. Grief sits where it wants. Tuesday, I called in sick for the first time in 7 years. Not Helen sick, actually sick. The kind of sick where getting out of bed feels like a civil engineering project requiring permits and a feasibility study. I did not shower. I ate dry Cheerios out of the box at 11 in the morning while sitting on my couch in the same pajamas I had slept in, which were the same pajamas I had written a federal fraud referral in, which were the palm tree ones from Target, which at this point had been on my body for approximately 36 hours and had earned the right to be classified as a second skin. I watched 3 consecutive episodes of a show about people renovating tiny houses in Maine. I did not understand why anyone would voluntarily live in a tiny house in Maine. I still do not. I went back to bed at 2 in the afternoon. Captain came with me. He did not judge. That is a lie. He judged, but he came. Wednesday morning at 9:30, I woke up, walked to the bathroom mirror, and looked at a woman I did not entirely recognize. She had cereal in her hair. Her t-shirt had a stain on it that might have been butter pecan ice cream and might have been grief. I said out loud to nobody, "You have got to be kidding me." Then I got back into bed. The doorbell rang at 10:04. I did not answer. It rang again. My phone rang. The doorbell rang a third time, and then the person on the other side of it said, loud enough to come through my front door and probably through my neighbor's front door as well, Helen Elizabeth Marsh, "Open this door or I swear on my grandmother's biscuit recipe, I will call a locksmith and I will tell him you are a danger to yourself and to that cat." Delphine. I opened the door. She was holding 2 cups of chicory coffee from Gallery Espresso and a paper bag from Clary's, and a look on her face like she was about to invoice me for emotional damages. She looked me up and down. She said, "Helen, you are wearing a t-shirt from 2020. There is cereal in your hair. You look like a woman who has been haunted by a breakfast food. Go get in the shower right now because I am not having this conversation with you looking like that." I said, "Delphine, I am fine." She walked past me into my kitchen like she held the deed to it, which after 9 years of friendship she essentially does, set the coffees down, looked at the open box of Cheerios on the counter, looked at Captain who was sitting on the kitchen table staring at her like a co-conspirator, and said without turning around, "Yeah, you are doing great. Here is the thing I need you to know." On that Wednesday morning, Delphine was supposed to be at her rheumatologist at 10 for her arthritis assessment. It was a big appointment. They were reviewing whether she needed to start a new medication that would let her keep gripping books hard enough to shelve them, which is to say they were reviewing whether she could keep her bookstore open. She had been preparing for it for 2 weeks. She sent her nephew instead. She came to me. When I found this out, about 30 minutes in, while I was sitting at the kitchen table in a clean sweatshirt drinking coffee, I started to cry and said, "Delphine, go to your doctor. I am fine." Delphine, who had her feet up on the other kitchen chair at that point in her leggings, looked at me the way she looks at a student who has just said something she is going to need to correct gently but firmly. She said, "Helen, I have been living with these joints for 65 years. They are not going anywhere. You, on the other hand, are falling apart on a schedule that concerns me. My grandmother raised me to show up for the people I love. And frankly, if I had gone to that appointment instead of coming here, she would have risen from her grave to come yell at me herself, and that woman's ghost does not need any more reasons to be disappointed in the living. Drink your coffee." I told her everything. The March brunch, the photograph from Hilton Head, the loan file, the UCC, the checkbox, the appraiser and his golf tan, the letter I never sent, the dinner on River Street, the mint, julep, the sentence, the handkerchief, the memo, the freezer, the butter pecan, the email to Patricia, Ethan on the porch, the other sentence, the one about the porch. Delphine listened. Delphine did not interrupt once. Delphine, who interrupts the way other people breathe, who once interrupted a keynote speaker at a Savannah State commencement to correct his pronunciation of Oglethorpe, did not interrupt one single time. When I finished, she looked at me for about a minute without speaking. She took a sip of her chicory coffee. She said, "Helen, can I say one thing about Garrett first?" I said, "Please." She said, "That man did not just lie on a loan application. That man tried to pour concrete over somebody's grandfather." The room changed. I looked at her. She looked back at me with the expression of a woman who has been carrying something for a long time and has decided this is the morning she sets it down. She told me, "The riverfront parcel Garrett wanted to develop, the one with the $18 million lien and the $22 million appraisal and the environmental report that mentioned a possible historical site in a footnote nobody was supposed to read, that land held a cemetery, an unmarked civil rights cemetery from the 1960s. 14 people were buried there, church members, activists, families. People who had lived and worked and worshipped in Savannah when Savannah did not want them to, and who had been buried on donated land because the official cemeteries would not have them. One of those 14 people was Reverend Louis Robichaud, Delphine's grandfather, buried in 1964 by his congregation after 40 years of ministry at 5 churches across Chatham County. Buried on land that was never officially recorded because in 1964, in Savannah, Georgia, nobody with the authority to record it believed it was worth recording. I cried. Not the way I cried on the kitchen floor with the grits. This was different. This was the kind of crying that happens when you realize the story you are inside of is larger than the one you thought you were telling. I had been thinking about a loan. I had been thinking about a checkbox and an appraisal and a man who did not look up from his shrimp. Delphine was thinking about her grandfather's bones. We sat in my kitchen for a long time after that. Then Delphine said, "Get dressed. I am taking you to lunch." We went to Crystal Beer Parlor on Jones Street. I ate an entire plate for the first time in 4 days. Delphine said, halfway through her sandwich, "Helen, you did not crack the foundation. The foundation was already cracked. You just told people to stop building on it." On the drive home, windows down, October air coming through the car smelling like salt and magnolia, I thought about a box in my attic, a box I had not opened since 2014, a box full of Thomas's papers. And I remembered something my husband had written down once, a long time ago, because he believed someone should. Thomas kept everything: report cards from students he was proud of, postcards from field trips, a newspaper clipping about a Civil War reenactment he took his 8th graders to in 2011 that he said was historically inaccurate but emotionally useful, which is a sentence only a history teacher would construct and mean as a compliment. He kept a receipt from a restaurant in Charleston where we had dinner on our 5th anniversary. He kept a drawing Ethan made in 2nd grade of a house with a chimney and a dog we did not have and a sun with a face on it. Thomas kept things the way some men keep tools. Not because he planned to use them again, but because he believed that throwing something away was a kind of forgetting, and Thomas did not believe in forgetting. I kept Thomas's everything. It has been in a box in my attic since August of 2014. The box is brown cardboard. I wrote Thomas, papers on the side in black marker the week after his funeral. I had not opened it in 10 years. On a Thursday evening in late October, I climbed the narrow stairs to my attic, with a pull-string light overhead and dust on every surface, and the particular silence that attics have, which is the silence of a house holding its breath above you. The box was in the corner behind a suitcase we took to Hilton Head in 2012 and a stack of Ethan's old yearbooks. I pulled it out. I sat on the attic floor. Captain had followed me up the stairs, which he had never done before, and he sat in the doorway watching me the way he watches birds through the window, very still, all attention. I opened the box. Lesson plans, report cards, the postcards, a field trip permission slip with a coffee ring on it. A student essay Thomas had marked with an A+ and a note in the margin that said, "This student understood," and underneath it all, at the bottom, a brown leather notebook. I knew this notebook. I had seen Thomas writing in it at the kitchen table in 2012. He would sit with his coffee on Saturday mornings and write for an hour, sometimes 2, in small, careful handwriting that got smaller as the morning went on because Thomas wrote the way he talked, starting big and then getting quiet when he reached the part that mattered. I had asked him once what he was working on. He said, "Something somebody should have written down a long time ago." Then he went back to writing and I went back to my coffee, and that was the last time I asked because I had learned by then that Thomas told you things when they were ready to be told and not a minute before. I opened the notebook. Thomas had been researching the cemetery. He had found it in 2012, 2 years before he died, during a local history project he was developing for his 11th grade class. He had interviewed elderly residents of West Savannah. He had gone to churches. He had sat in living rooms with people in their 80s who remembered where the graves were because they had been children when the burials happened. He wrote down 14 names, dates, congregations, family connections. He drew a map by hand on page 6, a careful pencil sketch of the parcel, with small X marks where the graves were, based on the memories of people who had stood at those gravesides 50 years earlier. Page 7, Reverend Louis Robichaud, 1889 to 1964, pastor of First African Baptist of the Marsh, buried by his congregation on land donated by the Habersham family. Never officially recorded. Thomas had written next to the entry, in his careful teacher's handwriting, 40 years of ministry, 5 churches, buried on ground nobody thought to put on a map. On the last page with writing, Thomas had written one sentence: "Someone should mark this ground before the city forgets it was ever here." He died before he could do anything with it. ALS took his handwriting before it took his voice, and took his voice before it took the rest of him. The notebook was written in the last year his hand could still hold a pen. I can tell you exactly which page he started losing his grip. Page 11. The letters begin to widen. The lines start to drift. The R in Robichaud on page 7 is steady and certain. The R in a different name on page 11 trembles. I sat in my attic holding that notebook, and I understood that my husband had found those 14 people 2 years before he died, and that he had run out of hand before he ran out of purpose. The next afternoon, I drove to Bull Street. I walked into Robichaud, books, and maps. Delphine was behind the counter with her reading glasses on, pricing a box of estate sale maps with hands that were swollen but working. I set the notebook on the counter. I said, "Thomas found something in 2012. I think you need to see it." Delphine opened the notebook. She read the first page. She turned to the second. She read slowly, the way she reads everything, with the patience of a woman who spent 30 years teaching people to pay attention to what they were looking at. She reached page 7. She read the name, Reverend Louis Robichaud, 1889 to 1964. Her grandfather, found by a white history teacher in 2012, written down in a brown leather notebook, in handwriting that was already beginning to shake. Delphine put her hand flat on the page. She did not speak for about 30 seconds. Then she said, very quietly, "Your husband found my grandfather before I knew where to look." I said, "Thomas always said someone should write it down." Delphine said, "Someone did." She kept the notebook on the counter of her bookstore for 3 days. She said she wanted it where people could see it. On the 4th day, she put it in the glass case with the first editions, next to the signed copy of Midnight in the Garden of Good and Evil. I did not argue. Thomas would not have argued either. He would have been embarrassed and then secretly pleased, which is what he was about, everything good that ever happened to him. I went back to work on a Thursday morning. I bought a second coffee from the place on Drayton Street and left it on Rafael Torres's desk before he arrived. No note. He knew who it was from. I sat down at my own desk and I felt something I had not felt in 10 years. Not anger, not satisfaction. Something quieter. The feeling of a woman whose husband's handwriting was about to matter again, 12 years after his hand stopped working. I want to tell you about what happened to Garrett Devereaux in the 7 weeks after I sent that memo, not because it was dramatic, but because it was not. What happened to Garrett was the opposite of dramatic. It was quiet and procedural, and it unfolded in the specific, bureaucratic, deeply unsexy way that consequences unfold in regulated industries. Which is to say, slowly, politely, and with a great deal of stationery. Savannah Morning News had scheduled Garrett for the cover of their November issue. A profile. Coastal visionary. 8,000 words. Professional photographer at his office on a Tuesday. The magazine's managing editor, whose name I will not share because this is a small city and I am not that kind of person, received 3 separate phone calls that first week. One from a board member at Atlanta First National, one from a member of the Oglethorpe Club, one from a trustee at the Savannah Preservation Society. None of these calls mentioned fraud. All of them mentioned timing and optics and perhaps the first quarter issue instead. By early November, the profile had been pulled. There was a polite email to Garrett citing scheduling conflicts. Garrett called the editor 4 times. The editor did not call back. The Oglethorpe Club, which I mention only because of what it represents and not because I have personal opinions about it, although I do have opinions about their shrimp cocktail, which I tasted once at a nonprofit dinner and found aggressively adequate, began its annual holiday gala planning in November. The Devereaux family had been invited to 2 private events for 3 years running. The invitations this year did not arrive. Garrett called the membership chair twice. The membership chair did not return the calls. Patricia Langford, chair of the Savannah Preservation Society, called Garrett in late November. She was warm and brief, the way Southern women are warm and brief when they are closing a door on your face while smiling. She said the society had decided to broaden the search for the hospital board nomination. She said they appreciated his years of interest. A different name was put forward at the December meeting. The vote was unanimous. Memorial Health, where Garrett had sat on the board for 11 years, did not place him on the nominating slate in December. Eleanor was telling people he had chosen to step away to focus on family. He had not chosen. I know this because Ethan told me later, and Ethan had no reason to lie about it by then. They simply did not want him. I want you to notice something about this cascade because it is the thing I have thought about most in the 14 months since. Garrett did not lose a single dollar in the immediate aftermath. Atlanta First National did not call his loan. He did not go bankrupt. He did not lose his house or his cars or his dock on the marsh. He kept Eleanor. He kept, in some strict accounting sense, his business. What he lost was the look on people's faces when he walked into a room, the handshake that used to come before he reached for it, the drink bought by a stranger at the club that was never really from a stranger, the phone call from the foundation chair that used to come every October like clockwork. One by one, those gestures stopped arriving. He was still a wealthy man. He was a wealthy man standing in the same rooms he had always stood in, waiting for people to treat him the way they used to, and watching them decide not to. He had spent 40 years purchasing that attention with the precision of a man collecting art. It took 6 weeks for all of it to be quietly returned to the gallery. The riverfront development was suspended pending a full environmental and historical review. The Savannah Morning News, in a separate article in early December, ran a piece about the cemetery. The story was sourced in part from a brown leather notebook provided by a local bookstore owner and retired professor named Delphine Robichaud, whose grandfather was among the 14 people buried on the site. The article ran on page 1. It was 1,200 words. It included a hand-drawn map made by a high school history teacher who had died in 2014. Thomas's name was in the paper. I read it twice. I cut it out. I put it in a drawer. I keep things. A community petition to designate the site as an official historical memorial reached 4,000 signatures by mid-December. The Savannah City Council agreed to review the proposal in January. Delphine was invited to chair the advisory committee. She accepted. She wore her good cardigan to the first meeting. I know this because she sent me a photograph of herself standing in front of City Hall looking like a woman who had waited 65 years to stand exactly where she was standing and who was not planning to move. Brooke. I should tell you about Brooke. The engagement ring Ethan had given her appeared on a Georgia Facebook resale page in early December, 4 days after they broke up. In January, Brooke got engaged again, a young man from Charleston, son of a developer. It lasted 5 weeks. She posted that ring on the same Facebook page in February. The same page. You cannot make that up. Ethan told me about it in December, and I made a face that he described as mom trying not to look happy about something she is clearly happy about. He was not wrong. I was trying. I was not succeeding. Captain, I should note, finally emerged from under my bed that week. He had been under there since the night Ethan came to the porch. I did not blame him. I had considered joining him under there more than once. He came out on a Wednesday afternoon, walked to his food bowl, ate like nothing had happened, and then sat on the kitchen table and stared at me as if to say, "Are we done with all of that?" We were. Mostly. And then on a Tuesday in late November, I came home from work and found an envelope in my mailbox. Cream stationery, no return address, handwritten. I recognized the penmanship. I had seen it on the place cards at a dinner I would prefer to forget. The envelope was cream-colored, with a weight to it that suggested the stationery alone cost more than my electric bill. There was a monogram in the upper left corner that I will not describe because I am not interested in providing anyone with more information about Eleanor Devereaux's taste in paper goods than is absolutely necessary. No return address. The handwriting was small and precise and familiar. I had seen it on the place cards at a dinner in October that I have spent 14 months trying to forget and 14 months failing. I opened it on my porch. It was late afternoon. The light was coming through the live oaks at the angle it hits in late November in Savannah, which is low and gold and makes everything look like a painting of itself. Captain was on my lap. He had been on my lap more than usual since he came out from under the bed. I think he was making up for lost time, or he was cold. With Captain, it is difficult to distinguish between affection and temperature regulation. The letter was 4 paragraphs. It was written in blue ink on cream paper that matched the envelope. Eleanor's handwriting was the kind of handwriting they teach at schools that cost more per year than my mortgage. Every letter was formed, every margin was even. She had not crossed anything out. She had either drafted this multiple times, or she was the kind of woman who got it right on the first pass, and I suspect she was the kind of woman who got it right on the first pass, because Eleanor Devereux does not do rough drafts. Eleanor Devereux does final versions of everything, including apologies that are not quite apologies. She did not mention the dinner. She did not mention the mint julep or the sentence about the other side of the river or my son's face when he said the word don't. She did not mention the sage dress or the handkerchief or the 11 blocks I walked home. She did not apologize for any of it. The letter was not about any of that. The letter was about the cemetery. I knew about the cemetery. I have not slept well in 4 years. I am not writing this to ask for anything. I am writing this because someone should know. Your husband was right. Someone should have marked that ground a long time ago. I am sorry I was not the person who did. I read it 3 times. The first time I read it fast, the way you read something when you are bracing for a blow. The second time I read it slowly, the way you read something when you realize the blow is not coming, and you are not sure what to do with the space where the blow was supposed to be. The third time I read it the way I read loan applications. Looking for the sentence the writer did not mean to include. I did not find one. Eleanor meant every word. That was the thing about the letter that surprised me most. She meant it. Captain sat on the letter after I set it down on the table. He sat on it like a paperweight with opinions. I let him. I thought about Eleanor for a long time that afternoon. She had known about the cemetery for 4 years. 4 years of knowing that her husband was planning to build a resort on top of 14 graves, and 4 years of not saying a word. She knew, and she stayed silent, and then she wrote a letter. I knew for 4 weeks, and I wrote a memo. I am not sure which of us did the braver thing. I am sure which of us did it faster. But I will say this for Eleanor. She wrote the letter. She did not have to. Nobody was asking her to. The cascade had already happened. Garrett had already lost the rooms. She could have stayed quiet for the rest of her life, and nobody would have known that she knew. She chose to tell me. Not the newspaper, not the Preservation Society, not the city council, she told me. A woman she had called small-town widow energy at a dinner table in October wrote her a letter in November and told her she had been carrying a secret for 4 years. I do not know what to do with that. I do not know if it is courage or guilt or something in between that does not have a name. I know it is a thing I did not expect from a woman whose face does not move. I folded the letter. I put it in the top drawer of my dresser, next to Thomas's handkerchief that still smells like mint and grapefruit, and next to Ethan's birthday card that says I am the world's second best mom. The drawer is getting crowded. I keep things. The weeks after the letter were the weeks when the cemetery became something larger than a footnote in an environmental report. The community petition reached 4,000 signatures. The Savannah City Council agreed to hold a formal review. Delphine was chairing the advisory committee. Thomas's notebook was going to be displayed at the Savannah History Museum as part of a small exhibit on civil rights history in Chatham County. A history teacher's shaking handwriting in a brown leather notebook was going to be behind glass in a museum, and I thought about Thomas and how he would have reacted to that. He would have said something self-deprecating about his penmanship. He would have been secretly thrilled. He would have stood in front of the exhibit and pretended to read the placard like he was seeing it for the first time, and I would have let him pretend, because that is what you do when someone you love gets to matter after they are gone. Thomas was wrong about a few things in his life. He was wrong about the tomatoes he tried to grow in our backyard in 2012. He was wrong about the time he told me he could fix the ceiling fan himself. He was wrong about a soup he made once that involved turnips and optimism in equal measure. But he was right about the things that mattered. He was right about writing things down. He was right about the ground. I put the letter in the drawer and closed it. I went back to the porch. Captain followed. The mockingbird was on the fence. I do not know if it is the same mockingbird. I prefer to believe it is. December was coming. The air was cool for Savannah, which means it was the temperature the rest of the country considers room temperature. And 3 weeks from that Tuesday on a Sunday morning, my phone was going to ring at 8:07, and my son was going to say something I had been waiting 14 months to hear. My phone rang on a Sunday morning at 8:07. I was on my porch. The coffee was made. Captain was on the railing again, which he is not supposed to be on, and which he will continue to be on for as long as he lives, because Captain does not recognize the authority of gravity or of me. I looked at the screen. Ethan. Mom, can I come over for coffee? I brought collages from back in the day. December in Savannah is not winter, the way most of the country understands winter. It is the temperature the rest of America would call a mild Tuesday, but for Savannah it was cold, 38 degrees. The live oaks were still green because live oaks in Savannah do not believe in seasons. I was wearing the sage linen blouse, the Sunday blouse. I wear it most Sundays. It is a good blouse. It did not do anything wrong. Ethan pulled into my driveway at 8:34. He got out of his car in a coat I did not recognize, holding a white bakery box. He had lost weight. He looked older in a way that was not only about the weight. His hair needed cutting. He walked up to my porch like a man walking into a room he was not sure he was still allowed to enter. We did not hug. I sat in my wicker chair. He sat in the wicker chair across from me. Between us was the small round table I bought at an estate sale in Thunderbolt for $22 in 2011. He put the box on the table. He said, I brought the peach kolaches. I said, honey, you hate peach. He said, I know you like them. I looked at him. He looked at his hands. He started to say something and stopped. Started again and stopped. Then he said it. Mom, I chose them over you. I want you to know I knew I was doing it. I knew at the restaurant. I knew on your porch. I knew and I did it anyway. I did not say it is okay. It was not okay. I reached across the table and I took my son's hand. It was cold. I held it. Neither of us spoke. The mockingbird was on the fence. I do not know if it is the same mockingbird that has been on that fence for 15 years. I prefer to believe it is. I told Ethan about the cemetery, about Delphine's grandfather, about the 14 names, about the petition and the advisory committee and the city council review. And then I told him about the notebook, about Thomas sitting at the kitchen table on Saturday mornings in 2012, writing in careful handwriting that was already beginning to shake, about the map on page 6, about the names, about the sentence on the last page. Someone should mark this ground before the city forgets it was ever here. Ethan's face changed. He said, Dad. I nodded. And then my 26-year-old son started to cry. Not politely, real crying, the kind that comes from a place below the place where you keep your composure. He put his hand over his face, and he said into his palm, Dad sat me down at the kitchen table when I was 9. He showed me photographs of people from the civil rights movement, and he said, every name on that ground is a person somebody loved. I said, I know, honey. He said, the ones with the hand-drawn maps. Dad drew those maps. I said, I know. We sat on the porch and I held my son's hand while he cried about his father's handwriting. Grief had cracked him open where pride had kept him closed. I was not glad that it took grief to bring him back to me, but I was grateful that something did. After a while, Ethan wiped his face. He ate 2 collages. I ate 1. We let the mockingbird come back 3 times. Then he said, Mom, Maggie called me about a recommendation letter. I am thinking about Chattanooga, starting over. I said, Honey, that is a good idea. He said, Also, Mom, she said something about you. He paused. They are promoting you. February, senior vice president of something. I said, Senior Vice President of Credit. He looked at me. He said, Mom, that is basically you run the bank now. I said, I basically run the credit side. But in February, yes. Yes, I do. He said, I am proud of you, Mom. He said it like he meant it, and I let him say it. I did not say you should have said that 14 months ago, even though I thought it, because a mother gets to think things she does not have to say. He stood up. He hugged me. A real hug, not a checking-the-box hug. The kind of hug that has weight to it, and duration, and the particular pressure of a person who is trying to fit an apology into their arms because their mouth has not figured out all the words yet. Then, he got in his car. He drove off. I watched the taillights go down the street, past the stop sign, around the bend, out of sight. I went inside. I went to the bedroom. I opened the top drawer of my dresser. I took out the silk handkerchief. Pale blue, white border, mint julep stain that had been there for 14 months and was almost gone now. The smell was fading. I held it for about 30 seconds. I folded it carefully. I put it back in the drawer, next to Ethan's birthday card, next to Eleanor's letter. I did not throw it away. I keep things. We have established that. I walked to my closet. Hanging on the right side, still in the plastic from the shop, was a charcoal blazer. Real buttons. Good wool. I had bought it in November for the day they would make the promotion official. I touched the sleeve. I did not try it on. I did not need to. In 6 weeks, it would be a Tuesday in early February, and I would walk into the boardroom at Coastal Heritage Community Bank, and Maggie Chen would stand up and say my name. I closed the closet. I went back to the porch. Captain was on the railing. The mockingbird was on the fence. My coffee was still warm. I did not check my phone. I was not being performative about not checking my phone. I just did not check it. I sat on my porch in Savannah, Georgia, in the sage linen blouse, on a Sunday in December, and I watched the mockingbird, and I finished my coffee, and I listened to the winter light come through my neighbor's live oak tree. And for the first time in a very long time, for the first time really since a Wednesday afternoon in August of 2014, when a neurologist in a small room had said the word progressive and the ground under me had gone away, for the first time since then, I was, in the quietest, most unremarkable way, fine. Just fine. That was all I needed. Thank you so much for staying with me through every minute of this. If this story meant something to you tonight, another one is already waiting on your screen. Go ahead and click it.